If you came here for a legislative update and you wanted to hear about bills that deal with sex and guns, you'll be sorely disappointed. I think the media has done a great job of covering every bill that has the word sex or gun in it someplace. And so I was going to really talk about two other issues that I think are important, and then open it up to questions. And I feel more comfortable actually having a discussion with people. So please think of challenge me, ask me hard questions. I'll do the best that I can. But first of all, I probably need to congratulate the Chamber. Every time I turn around, it seems like either a member's getting an award, or the Chamber's getting an award, or Knoxville's named the #1 place for job growth. And I know you all have a large say in that. And you should be also proud of Knoxville, and I'm proud of our delegation, our legislative delegation, especially when you compare us to some of the other delegations down there. Shelby County, not to mention names, but I mean, they can't, every year we're refereeing for those folks. They can't get along. But whether it's Democrat Joe Armstrong, Harry Tyndall, or the Republicans, Harry Brooks and Ryan Haynes and others, we try to get along and do what's best. And Knoxville is known, especially in education circles, as being very innovative, getting things done. It's miles ahead of the other urban areas that we have in Tennessee. And I know that the Chamber has put a lot of emphasis on that. One thing I wanted to talk about, the first thing, is something that Governor Haslam's doing that I think is going to change state government. And it's something that's been needed to be done for about 20 years, and I think his predecessors have never had the political will. In fact, in conversations, it turns out they knew this was a problem, they knew it needed to be done, but they didn't want to spend political capital on it. And it's the state, how we treat state employees through the civil service program. And a lot of times when people complain about state services and they're not getting what they think they should have, or there's long waits and stuff, it can be traced back to this. In fact, when the governor came in, you probably remember Governor Haslam. He's this guy, he's from Knoxville, Tennessee. If y'all know him, okay. He said he was going to do a top to bottom review of state government, and indeed he did. And he said all 22 of my commissioners, when they came back to report to me, all 22 of them, and I mean we're talking about a diverse group of people, came back and said our civil service program's broken. The way we hire and fire and manage people, it makes no sense. It leads to bad outcomes. And so even though it is an election year, and the governor has told us, I'm putting something tough on your plate in an election year, he has gone forward to change that. And so what has emerged is something called the TEAM Act, Tennessee Excellence in Accountability and Management Act. And I'm the House sponsor of it. And so I've gotten to be in a lot of meetings with the State Employees Association, and I do have to say they've been very professional. I've learned that if everybody can stay calm, things work a lot better. My mother's pure Swiss, and they're a peace-loving, neutral people, and so I think I try to channel the Swiss blood in me when I'm negotiating with people. Now my dad, he's Irish and Polish, and so I say Irish gives me a little bit of fight, the Polish makes me dumb enough to keep doing what I'm doing. So have I just insulted some fellow Polacks here? Somebody sees that camera. But anyway, so the negotiations are going well. Basically, the easiest way to explain what we're trying to do is the current system is based on seniority. What the governor's trying to do is change it to performance. And there is value in having someone who's got experience, who has worked, but that's not the best way to pick who advances or who's the best person for the job. And I'll give you a very good example. I was talking to someone who's they're an appointing authority. I call them hiring and firing, but I guess the legal term is the appointing authority. I was talking to them, and they said, when we're looking to fill a position, we have to take the top 3, and it's based on a score, and the score is weighted towards seniority. So you may have somebody who's got 30 years of experience, 29, 28, and those three rise to the top, and they're the ones that have to be interviewed, they're the ones that have to be picked. Now, if the job deals with something, say, computers, guess what? My daughter, who stood before you at some time, she's much better than her dad at computers, and she would probably be the better pick. She would not even be considered. In fact, a lot of young, bright people coming out of college, out of the University of Tennessee, they don't stand a chance because they don't have the points to get them up where they can even be considered for a job. And then they have to, if they get hired at a very low level, they have to stick around so long before their talents can be used. So obviously they go on to do something else. There's a system in place right now called bumping. And the way bumping works is that if your position is cut, if you lose it, you can go and find a position like yours and take that person's place. You know, it's almost like musical chairs. And for some reason, the State Employees Association is really pushing for that. But I found when I talk to state employees and I point out what it really does to them and why they're vulnerable, they suddenly don't think it's such a great idea, because you can be doing your job, doing a great job, you've bought your home, you've put down your roots, and then out of the blue somebody can show up and say, I want your job, and you're gone. That doesn't make sense. And it's not easy to manage state government when you've got that going on. You're trying to remove one position and that person bumps somebody. That person then goes find somebody who doesn't have as much seniority. They bump them, and it's just a domino effect. It makes no sense at all. So what the governor's going to do is, and he's got his commissioner of human resources, is putting together where every job will have a job descriptions, the expectations, what are you going to be evaluated on, and then there will be annual evaluations. And in the future, if there's a job position and anyone who's eligible for it, who meets the minimum requirements, they will be eligible to be interviewed, and they'll be doing it. There will be a preference for veterans that if you're a veteran, you will be interviewed. It doesn't guarantee you a job. And so this performance is what all the raises, promotions, etc. will be based on. Now, we're not getting rid of civil service. Susan, you know how it works. People, they're getting rid of civil service. There will still be an appeals process, but it's going to instead. Right now, it can take 3 years. And so when you go in to get your driver's license and you're wondering why it's taking so long, it's probably because there's some position where somebody's been fired and they're appealing it and they can't hire anybody until it works its way through the system. And I mean, it can take 3 years. This will streamline it down to a 3-step process, and we're talking about more like 3 months on it. What's amazing is this makes so much, well, maybe it's not amazing. I was about to say what's so amazing is this makes so much sense, and yet politicians aren't 100% for it. You know, I just realized I've got a microphone, don't I? I don't have to be held. Can you hear me? I better stay here? Okay, very good. I'll just stay here. This way I can hand gesture more. So, but I will show y'all a little trick. When we stand up on the House floor, people talk, and I always train the freshmen, because you have a way of moving your head like this when you're talking, and then people can't hear you. So Frank nicely puts his thumb right here, and then it follows with you. I just go ahead and put it on my chin, and then when I talk, it follows along with you. So if any of you all ever have to use a microphone, you've learned that. Okay. But politicians say we've got to be effective and efficient. And the way we run state government right now, we are not. And so we're slowly bringing people along. The Senate, it's been, as the bill moves through there, they've been a little bit, let's say, a little bit more heavy-handed. So it's become very partisan. The Republicans vote for it. The Democrats don't. In the House, I think the negotiations, we're going to take some of the amendments that the Democrats are offering. I better not get ahead of myself. We'll see what next week holds. But I think what you're going to see is that there's going to be more of a bipartisan approach to this. And I've told the administration this is so important, because as this goes into place, there's going to be glitches, you know, as you set up your performance system and your evaluation. And it's better that we all go in this together than to have one party sniping at you every step of the way, saying, see, we told you this wasn't going to work, and see what's happened. And so I've told them it's worth taking some amendments that doesn't change the overall effectiveness of this, and to gain bipartisan support, you'll be happy 3 years down the road on it. So hopefully that is going to happen. So that's item number one. Are there any questions on that system? Does it make sense? Does anybody in their business right now have bumping process? No? Okay, it makes sense. We'll see.
Representative Dunn,
yes?
Probability of getting it through.
I think it's going to happen. In the House, every vote has been very close, and not every Republican has been for it. Because, as you know, if a bunch of state employees from your district show up in your office, it puts a lot of pressure on you. And so we'll see. That's why I think it's very important to make it bipartisan and in the end get an overall vote. So things I think will change as we move along. The State Employees Association and working with them since they've been listened to, since we've taken some, I think we've made over 20 changes. They're not for it yet, but their last newsletter was a whole lot different from the first newsletter they sent out about this bill. So, well, you never know what's going to happen in Nashville. That place is crazy. So, any other questions about that? Makes sense. You should be very proud of your governor that he's following through on his campaign promises. I think it's going to make a huge difference. And you probably haven't read any of this in the newspaper because it doesn't have anything about guns or sex in it. So.
You said that it's going to happen. Is that this session?
Yes, it passed out of the Senate Finance Committee, so it'll be going to the Senate floor. We're in the House Finance Committee. It was supposed to pass out this week. Feathers got ruffled, and I'm like, no, y'all are saying the same thing. I don't know, it's just very interesting. And former Speaker Navy rolled this bill, and the administration don't roll it, and I rolled it. I felt like we need to talk, and there's no use getting people discombobulated. There's an old saying in Nashville, and it's the absolute truth. The slower you go, the faster you get there. Doesn't make any sense, but I've seen it time and time again. Be calm, do it right, get everybody on board, and you'll get there a lot faster. And I always have to remind myself of that. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to talk about is a bit more controversial. And it reminds me of something Voltaire said. It is dangerous to be right in matters on which the established authorities are wrong. Let me say that again. It is dangerous to be right in matters on which the established authorities are wrong. And obviously, being a guy who climbed trees for 14 years and swung with ropes and chainsaws and took down things that weighed tons and tons, I've lived a dangerous life. So taking on issues where the established authorities don't agree with you, it's worrisome, but I think when I ran for office, I was going to look for the truth. I wanted to be a good steward of monies. One reason I ran when it came to education is all my life, I remember from a little kid how many times there was a tax increase, and it was for the children. It was for education. And yet, if you looked at achievement, over the years, it didn't matter if we had the career ladder, lower class sizes, whatever. It all just ACT scores, little dips, little ups. Didn't matter what we did, how many tax increases we had. We'd start these programs and then go on to the next one. And so back in like 98, they started some pilot pre-K programs. Not very in-depth. A lot of people would say, well, they weren't high quality. But they did some, and then it got added to in the Sundquist administration. There were more children. But when Governor Bredesen came into office, this was going to be his major initiative. He wanted to go to voluntary universal pre-K, where every 4-year-old would have the opportunity to go to pre-K. And I remember the lobbyist came in to see me one day. They're counting votes and to talk about it. And we talked about some, and I asked them a question. I said, well, what is the purpose of pre-K? And they kind of looked at each other. and thought and said, well, I guess to get ready for kindergarten. And I said, well, how are we going to measure that? How will we know that they are ready for kindergarten? And they looked at each other and said, well, we'll have to get back to you on that. And I'm still waiting. They never go back. And I think in education, a lot of times we focus on input. What are we doing? We're going to start pre-K, or we're going to reduce class size, and we measure stuff on input. And I think business folks measure on output. What have we achieved by doing if having sales meetings, did that increase sales or not? You don't just say, well, we're going to increase sales meetings, and isn't that good of us? You're going to say, what did we get for increasing sales meetings? And so it got me interested in the whole thing that if they don't even know why we're doing this or how we're going to measure it, I better look into it. And I was real open-minded at this time. And so I started reading some reports and doing some background. And I found this one report where someone had compiled all the pre-K studies from across the board. And I noticed in almost every one of them, you have this bump. Anytime you take a child and you work with them for a whole year, something's going to happen. And something good, something positive. I don't deny that. But then it seemed like, whether it was Oklahoma, Georgia, or whatever, it immediately faded away and was gone. And so that got me very interested to watch what Tennessee would do. And so as this pre-K program, as I started asking about accountability, we added a provision that said we would have an independent group look at the pre-K program, look at the kids, look at achievement as it goes on. And so that led to 4 studies. And now I guess I'm going to get to, like I said, I wish my daughter was here to show me how to do this kind of stuff. I actually had an intern down in Nashville put this PowerPoint together. It's not very pretty, but it's done. Check. So, and you see the cartoon there, which is funny, but it's really not funny. But the scores for our latest standardized test are disappointing. We have to articulate a coherent policy of obfuscation. I think that means confuse people, if I'm correct. Oh, it does work. What's happening is there's a lot of money out there for people to sell the pre-K program. There's a lot of money, and these are all foundations where someone can go in and write a grant, and if you give me a lot of money, I will go sell the program. And so people have full-time jobs of going to legislators, talking about how good and wonderful it is. They have PR firms where they go and have Bredesen sit, cross-legged on the floor and read The Little Engine That Could to 4-year-olds and get it all going. But as a legislator, as someone who's a steward of your tax dollars, I have to dig a little bit deeper below that. And so pre-K has been sold as making monumental changes in Tennessee. I think you've probably heard people get up and say what it's going to do. And so I brought examples of things that have come across my desk in this sales thing. And I've tried to, the part in yellow is sort of the key, but I wanted to put it in context, that I didn't just kind of pull something out. You can read the whole thing, the paragraph I took out. But here it says that we're going to save $16 for every dollar we spend on pre-K. And then note, this statistic comes from the high scope Perry Preschool study through age 20. You'll hear a couple times high scope Perry Preschool, and that's important because basically a lot of the glowing things you hear about pre-K come from this study, and I'm going to tell you what this study was actually about. In special education costs, it would reduce it by 10%. Tennessee would save as much as $80 million in special education costs alone. And if anybody's got a question about a slide, you can ask it now or remember the slide. Now, there's not that many, so I can flip back to it. And not only was this going to help in special ed, but it was going to make a significant dent in prison populations. And basically saying that pre-K will put the kids on the path to college as opposed to going to prison. And this comes from the high scope Perry Preschool Project that was done. Would save us $171 million So we're saving $171 million on prison costs. What was it, $80 million on special ed? I mean, it's really getting up there. Now, the High Scope Perry Preschool Project, any glowing report on pre-K and why we need it will almost always, if you follow the footnotes back far enough, it will come to this project. The project was done in 1962. I was a year old. It was 1962. The participants, there were 123 high-risk African-American children. They were all from low socioeconomic status levels. They had very low IQs, borderline mentally impaired, and they were all at risk of failing school. So, Lee, you're a statistics kind of guy. That's a very unique sample. A very unique sample. It's not representative of all of Tennessee. It's not representative of Knoxville. But what's happened is they've taken this little sample of people from 1962 and then extrapolated the results to say this would work in a universal setting. Wait, let me, before I get away from the prisons, this isn't on the slide, I wish I had done it, but here's the kind of thing I get on my desk, Pre-K, a smart investment produced by the Tennessee Alliance for Early Education, funded by the Pew Center. And it talks about how wonderful Pre-K is. And so they take the results from here that some of the kids who were in Pre-K weren't as apt to go to prison. Actually, if you dig deeper into it, what happened was they didn't go as many times. They still went. It was like they divide them up, those who went over 4 times as opposed to those who went less. Anyways, most of them went to prison, some went more than others. And so they do it. But anyways, so they take this and they say, well, the kids who went in this Perry Preschool program, they were more apt to graduate. And if more people graduate, graduates are less apt to commit crime. And so if they're less apt to commit crime, if you have pre-K, they'll graduate and there'll be less crime. And so they're able to say, by using that thinking, that if we go to a universal pre-K program, graduation rates will go up by 10%. We'd have 8,000 more additional graduates, and we will prevent more than 80 murders a year. If we have pre-K, we will prevent 80 murders and 6,400 aggravated assaults every year. And that's how they get to it. I kind of use the analogy or the example of you can kind of use logic, but when you get to the end of it, you really don't have a result that makes sense. Everybody here has probably been to a UT game. You know, as you're going, there's the kids with the newspaper with the line up there selling the papers, right? And so on a Saturday, say the kid is there on a Saturday, it's a UT game, he sells 500 papers for $1, he makes $500. Now if you said, if that kid works 50 Saturdays a year, we're going to let him take 2 off because it's probably labor laws or whatever, but he works 50, how much money will he make in a year? Well, simple logic, very simple, would say he's going to make $25,000 a year. But you're not taking into account that there's only, 6 games. And the other Saturdays he'll be standing there and be lucky if he sells a single paper. But that's kind of how the logic is. They take one little thing and then start multiplying it to suddenly say we're going to save 80 lives from people not getting killed. And another difference was that what they did at this preschool was a lot different than what we do is where we send the kids and they're there for so long. They were actually only there for 2.5 hours. It was over a 2-year period. So they were 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. And the teachers went into the home to visit, and they had group meetings where all the parents had to come. And I bumped into a guy about a week ago who's with the Child and Family Studies at UT, and we were kind of talking about this. He said, well, I'm really interested in your thoughts. He said, they really don't like you in my department, but I think you're using accurate stuff. And so I was talking about the High Scope Perry Project. He said, well, you know the guy who ran that, he would get in his car and run and get people and bring them. It was very in-depth. And that's one reason that it no longer exists. You can't have a 1-to-5 ratio and have a guy in his car running around getting people and people going into schools and stuff. You can't have that. And that's not what we do in Tennessee. What we've basically done is said, we've got, counting kindergarten, 13 years, and we've just added one more year of what we're doing, 180 days. And so what are the results from Tennessee's pre-K program? Like I said, there was four studies done from an independent group who looked at the academic achievement. Now, before we get to that, I asked, will you give me the special education expenditures in Tennessee? And I try to be honest in all this. There's numbers, and you can say, well, this was added this year, that was added this year, but you're looking for trends. If this is a wonderful thing that's going to save $80 million a year, you should see a downward trend in spending since we've had this in place for 5 or 6 years now. And so I go back from when Bredesen cranked up pre-K, and you get over here, and, oh yeah, I've got this nifty little thing here. And you see, back when it started, 752 million, and now it's 895. Definitely not going down. And there's some other reasons why it's up, but you would expect a trend, or at least it's staying the same, and it didn't happen. Now this here, this is where they compared kids who were in the state pre-K program to those who were not in it. And you see, depending on how good your eyes are, you may see 2 lines. There's actually 4 lines. I wish my daughter was here. Okay. There's actually 4 lines here. This is reading, and it tracks the pre-K versus non-pre-K. And what they do is they divide the kids up between the free and reduced price lunch. For simplicity, I'm going to say the poor kids versus the other kids. And so these 2 lines here, those are the other kids. And these here are the poor kids. The dotted line are the kids who were not in state pre-K. So this would be at the end of kindergarten. So when they say that if you go to pre-K, you will do better in kindergarten, you see the difference. And this is on a 500, 600 point scale. The difference is you can say, yes, they did better, but how much better? And then what happens over time, by first grade, the lines are converging, and by second grade, they've met. Now what's interesting, you'll see this over and over, the kids, these are the at-risk kids. These are the ones that you say their mom's on crack and daddy's in jail and that. So that's what's happening with them. Now these other kids who would probably be more your children, grandchildren, you get the little initial bump, but then in a faster fashion, they meet, cross, and what actually happens is the children who were not in pre-K start outperforming the kids who were in the state one, the one that we spent the taxpayer dollars on. So this is in reading, this is language arts, you see almost the exact line. I've got the report here. If you doubt me, you can look at all these graphs. You'll see this is very representative of what you see. Lee, you've got the handout. I've got 30, that's getting close. But basically, what I'm handing out is this here. This is sort of your take-home, something for you to look at, something for you to ponder. Because a lot of times, these reports and what the press, they only go as far as, well, it fades away by the end of the first grade or second grade. This is the chart that follows the kids to 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Man, how many times do I have to do that before I learn? Okay. Here's where it breaks out between the poor kids and the non-poor kids, but here's where they just take everybody together as one group. And if you'll notice, as you go down your sheet, those who are in pre-K versus non-pre-K, in every single case, we're talking about reading, mathematics, social studies, science, in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, the non-pre-K students, according to the way they did this research, outscored those we spent the money on in the state pre-K program. Not some, not most, but all. And the bold numbers mean it was done at a statistically significant level. So the only place where they still outscored them, but it wasn't statistically significant, was 4th grade science. And this comes from the report that Tennessee spent. They had 4 reports, one each year. The final report finally came out. And if you read every one of them, they all show the same thing. A bump at the beginning, it fades away. If we expand pre-K to a full-blown project, we're talking about $500 million. And whether you're in business or in government, it all comes down to how do you expend your resources. If we all had all the money we wanted, we could do all kinds of things, but we have to make wise decisions. So the question is, as we look for improvements in education, where is the best use of $500 million? Because if we make this universal, once you begin it, you know, what was it? Didn't Ronald Reagan say something about the only thing you can't kill is a government program? That will be $500 million every year going to this and not available for others. Driving over here, one reason I was a little late is Hal Hill was talking to Dr. McIntyre, who I think is doing a great job. And Dr. McIntyre was giving his sales pitch of why he needs $35 million. And he was getting to the point of, here's what I'm going to spend it on. And so I sat in the parking garage, and I kept waiting to hear pre-K. And I kept waiting. And he was talking about tablets and teachers and here. The closest he got to pre-K is that he'd like to expand kindergarten from them getting out at 1 o'clock, that they go on to 2:45. So that's why it's so important that we go ahead and look at it. I was watching a little special on Bernie Madoff. Everybody knows him, the guy who came up with the Ponzi scheme. And what was interesting, there was a guy who caught on to what he was doing years before he actually got busted. And he took all the information, and he took it to the SEC, and he said, look, here, I've done the homework for you, here it is. And yet, for 3 years, Bernie Madoff kept doing what he was doing until it all blew up. And so I'm trying to say, this is the information. You know, this comes from an independent source. Vanderbilt is now doing a study, and it will be cleaner. I try to be honest on this. They will have a cleaner study than what they had here. But what concerns me is that as they started this study, they did an op-ed piece. Pre-K benefits are real. They're starting the study and they're doing op-ed pieces. And there's the researchers, their little faces there. And there's Governor Bredesen reading to the 4-year-olds. But you know, researchers, you don't usually think of them as doing op-ed pieces on their research at the front end. And what's interesting is in here near the end, they do kind of say, well, you know, and if we do find that this fades away, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do away with pre-K. So they're already kind of, they've probably looked at studies before. And a year after they did their study, they released the first study because they were comparing kids who had pre-K to kids who had no school. Well, anytime you compare somebody who's had a year of training in Spanish to someone who hasn't had any in Spanish, you're going to get better results. And so they were quoted in the paper, the results were so dramatic, Lipsey said, that Peabody researchers decided to release their preliminary findings even as they push ahead. I wonder if the results weren't that good if they'd rushed to the press. And what's interesting is this was done on March the 30th of last year. Today is March the 30th. And I noticed when I looked in my paper today, there was nothing on the second-year study where they were comparing the kids who had pre-K and kindergarten to the kids who just had kindergarten. Makes you wonder, maybe it's the fade factor is starting up and we're not going to see it. Now, I don't want to just be against something. I like to think, well, what can we do? And this, for those of y'all who need to go, I'm wrapping up here. So 3 ideas that I have that I think can help in early learning. First of all, you got to get parents involved. We have a Books from Birth program right now. We're already spending the money sending books into homes with little children. And what I'm suggesting we do is that in those books, down at the bottom, we put helpful hints for the parents. So they're not just reading the story, but it gives them instructions. Take your child's finger, touch the sides of the triangle, ask the child, where is the red bird? What do you think is going to happen next? And put instructions so that the parent doesn't just read the book, but they become the teacher and we create this parent-child educational bond. The second thing is that if we are going to go forward with a program where we want to get children ready for kindergarten, let's first say, what is ready? Is it kind of knowing what letters are, colors, shapes, motor skills, can you stand on one foot? And then see if we could not get that done during a summer project. Like maybe these very at-risk kids where you do see pre-K having more of an effect on, they would come in the summer. We've already got teachers that are on the payroll who would love to make some extra money. We've already got classrooms that are open in the summer that no one's using. get those kids in for an 8-week program so they can kind of catch up, know how to sit in their seat, how to hold a pencil, learn some stuff. And then the other kids would come in the fall and the kindergarten class would take off. That would cost 2/3 less than the program we have. And the third thing, and this is sort of the harsh thing, is I have found that really to get people to do stuff, there have to be natural consequences. Every year people introduce legislation, well, let's do a report card on parents, or let's fine them, or let's throw them in jail. You know, it doesn't work. But if you said your child cannot start kindergarten until they know these basic skills, you would be amazed at how many parents would go out and make sure those kids know those basic skills so that they can get into kindergarten. Now what happens is you say, well, what about the kid who doesn't? That's where you've got to weigh things. If we can get 85% of the kids working with their parents, getting them ready, getting them involved, and then the other kids, the only penalty to them is they start a year later, we may not be that far behind. In fact, in Finland, which at one time was top in educational achievement, was top, they have compulsory education starting at 7 years of age. You can send them at 6, but compulsory is 7. So I don't think you're going to really damage a kid that much. But anyways, I've talked too much. I will be quiet and answer questions.